The Great Circle is an action-adventure game with the emphasis on adventure. It's immersive and exciting, but not always that exciting. You'll be doing more shooting with your camera than with your gun, and you'll be plumbing just as many pipes as you will be tombs and temples. A great amount of care and attention and snakes has gone into making it feel like a classic indie adventure, and while it largely succeeds in this mission, there are some noticeable flaws in the machinery. These range from strange glitches to curious behaviours to a stalled side quest, and yet the Great Circle still forms an undeniably impressive whole. This is an immersive, sometimes exciting adventure game presented in a lush cinematic package. Look past the occasional shoddiness, and there is an awful lot to like here.
You again?
Yes, me again!
Above all, the Great Circle successfully captures the look, feel and sound of the original films, starting with a stellar depiction of a young Indiana Jones. When the man with the hat is introduced, we see Ford stepping out of the shadows, in a shot identical to the one from Raiders. The film wants you to feel awed by the sinister appearance of this man. The moment in the game is powerful for an entirely different reason. Here we are not so much awed by the man, as we are by the uncannily accurate recreation of Harrison Ford's face. This is Ford just as you remember him, pronounced the trombones. Recreating Ford was no mean feat. It required a great deal of research, with Machine Games consulting hundreds of old archival images of Ford so that they could study him from all angles. The expressions were acted out by Troy Baker with a camera strapped to his head. Small dots on his face were used to map his facial movements, which were then applied to a 3D mesh of Indy's face. Baker also lent his vocal talents, and his imitation of Ford's voice is pitch perfect, with all its gravelly and growly intonations. When Indy gets himself into trouble, Baker gurns and grimaces and generally takes great pains to convey his sufferings to the camera. Indiana Jones is not a machine, and you see this too in his climbing movements, for example when he struggles to pull himself up onto a ledge. All of these details contribute to making the character seem that much more authentic.
Dai, muoviti, strambo!
I'm trying.
The cutscenes feature all the hallmarks of a classic indie film. There's the moving red line tracing the journey on the map. There are shots that highlight Indy's well-defined silhouette. There's the rich and atmospheric use of lighting, with sharp noir-like shadows and high-contrast interiors. Like Raiders, the colours are deep and warm and earthy throughout. I was particularly impressed by the close-ups during the prologue, especially the one of the twitching turning corpse on the spike. Then there's the shots of dramatic irony and the dynamic camera work during action scenes. The visual presentation is sharply in tune with the original films. The Great Circle's music was composed by Gordy Harb, who was well versed in the music of John Williams. He previously worked on the score for Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings, as well as the music for several Star Wars games, so he's a natural fit for the project. The iconic Williams themes are used sparingly, with Indy's theme drifting in and out of the soundtrack before blaring loud and clear at the peak of some heroic stunt or dramatic climax. You'll hear echoes of the Ark theme during moments of epic discovery, and mystery suspense music while stalking the Siamese jungles. And of course, scenes of creepy crawlies are accompanied by pizzicato strings. The sound of Indy being punched in the film was achieved by hitting a pile of leather jackets with a baseball bat. The same technique was used to get the impact sounds in the Great Circle, but then there were tonal variations. You hear a different sound when you're getting punched, and when someone is punching you. Also, there is a slight gap between the punch sound and the reaction sound, which makes it easier for your ears to keep track of the action. There are other nice details, like how a knockout punch sounds meatier than a regular punch, or struck guard will sometimes let out a Wilhelm scream, or Nazi helmet will pop off with a tinny little clang. You never quite know what you're going to get when jumping into a scrap. The Great Circle is a boring title but a smart premise, providing the hero with ample excuse to zip around the world in search of ancient treasure. The MacGuffin in this case is a mummified cat, which has been stolen from Marshall College. Indy traces it to the Vatican where its true significance is revealed. The significance, of course, is setting up a running joke about Indy missing his cat.
Yes, Dr. Jones is an American who is looking for his missing cat.
With the lost cat found, there are plenty of other MacGuffins to track down, both great and small. Side quests are rooted in strange and exciting subplots. In Siam, there's an ongoing battle between village rebels and fascist invaders, reminiscent of Star Wars and Seven Samurai. In the Vatican, there are spies lurking in the corridors, courtesy of Father Ventura, a self-serving priest working alongside the fascists. In the lockbox in the Apostolic Palace is the confiscated diary of a supposedly mad priest. The Blackshirts are in charge of the Vatican now. It's rumoured that the Pope has been poisoned. There are small corners ripe with mystery and intrigue. Indiana Jones is obsessed with treasure. The story begins 1 year after Raiders, with Indy still hung up on the loss of the fertility idol.
People died for that thing, Marcus. Can't just let it go.
Marion has broken up with him. He finds a note from her in the blank journal she had gifted him. He crumples the note into a ball and replaces it with a photo of the cat mummy, his latest sweetheart. As the story unfolds, we see his priorities shift from things to people, just not completely. He still has some growing up to do in The Last Crusade.
She said I was too busy chasing the past.
Indy is not the only one driven by obsession. In the Vatican, he stumbles across Gina, an undercover journalist posing as a nun. She's obsessed with finding her missing sister, who herself is known to be an obsessive scientist. Voss is a slimy Nazi official obsessed with excavating precious artifacts from all around the world. Locus is the unfriendly giant obsessed with returning a cat mummy to its rightful home. All three characters act as foils to the hero. Voss, like Belloc, tries to convince Indy that they are much alike. Unlike Belloc, he is not charming in the slightest. He's full of slime and snake oil. He thinks of people as pawns, himself as king. When Voss comes face to face with Indy, he stares at him with cold, unblinking eyes, like an evil hypnotist. But every now and then the illusion breaks. He appears frightened, even insecure. When he shares his research with Jones, he comes across like a child desperate for his father's recognition. He never receives it, of course, and we never feel sorry for him. In the end, we enjoy seeing him get bashed on the nose and punished by his own hubris. Gina is the feisty love interest, much like Marion in Raiders, and very unlike Willie in Temple of Doom. She doesn't scream at the sight of corpses. She's been to prison so she can hold her own in a fight. As a companion, she's more of a help than a hindrance. You won't have to worry about her alerting enemies, or getting injured during a fight. Which is not to say that she cannot be clumsy, just that enemies ignore her presence as long as you maintain a low profile. When exploring, she provides light-hearted comic relief. She always has a wry comment tucked up her sleeve. Some lines she recycles too many times, but on the whole, she does a good job of undercutting the tension.
Are you alright, or have you fallen to your death?
If you're looking for more comic relief, then there's the fuddy-duddy Professor Savage found slightly off the beaten path. He tasks you with rescuing his intern, Sydney, who has the annoying habit of being kidnapped. Sydney and Savage are this game's answer to R2-D2 and C-3PO. Both seem clueless to the dangers surrounding them. Both stick out like sore thumbs. Even in the sweltering heat of Giza, you'll find Sydney in his knitted sweater and Savage his white three-piece suit.
Worked in perfect. Thank you.
Heavens above! Hello.
Naturally, the first-person perspective brings you up close to the action. The game places great emphasis on hand movements, whether it's scaring off scorpions with a torch, or turning a key in a door, or spreading out photos to study them with a magnifying glass. A camera makes a nice secondary piece of kit. Taking photos of marked objects will earn you adventure points, which you can spend on adventure books that upgrade your abilities. Seeing those photos taped to the pages of your journal is a quaint touch. On the other hand, you'll be seeing your fists bloodied in combat. Taking on your first black shirt is a thrill. The guard throws insults as well as punches. You can block and dodge the punches. You can also parry a blow before throwing one of your own. Some guards seem more scared, others more aggressive. There are underground fighting rings where you can practice your hand-to-hand combat with mean-faced contenders. These sections are short but sweet. Dotted around the arena are foods that buffer your health. You'll find plenty of foods in open play too, in camps, offices, markets, and many other places. Tools prove more useful than foods. Rather than use them for their intended purposes, you'll be using them to crack enemies over their skulls. There are carpet beaters, guitars, bells, pipes, dustpans, pickaxes and brooms. Most useful of all are sledgehammers. Some items afford a special animation. For example, you can use a cane to sweep an enemy off their feet. You can also use a gun as a bashing instrument, and you can throw an item at an enemy or near an enemy to distract them. You can also distract a guard with your whip, which somewhat negates the use of thrown items. The whip behaves in a lively manner. According to the creative director, its movements were modelled on a real one wielded by a Swedish whip master. You can use it to disarm an enemy or scare a guard dog into submission. Flick it at an unarmed guard to make his hand or head smart. The initial reactions are always great fun. You'll need the whip to swing yourself between distant platforms. When you're unsure where to go, it's often worth looking up. Climbable objects are sometimes marked white, making it easier to spot your next move. For example, you'll see white splotches of paint on scaffolding, bird droppings on the walls of the Vatican, white creepers in the jungle, or pale patches of worn rock in the underwater section of a temple. The signposting is well integrated with the environment, naturally pointing you in the right direction. The platforming is generous when you are leaping over perilous gaps. The perspective switches to third person when you are hanging off a ledge. There were times when I had quite clearly missed the jump, but my character ended up grabbing onto the ledge anyway. This approach might be too lenient for some, but it didn't have me complaining. It's off the beaten path where you'll find the more difficult platforming sections. One of my favourite involved a puzzling pyramid. After skirting the path to get inside, you must use various beams and platforms to swing your way upwards. The lack of hand-holding makes puzzles like these especially satisfying to solve. The story puzzles are special not so much for their design as their presentation. Most of them are fairly traditional in nature. You'll find mirror puzzles in the tombs of Egypt, and pipe-fitting puzzles in the hydraulic-powered temples of Siam. The mirror puzzles might remind you of the scene with the sunroom in Raiders. The payoff is similarly grandiose, as huge double doors groan open, or tall wooden structure rises up, along with a dramatic musical sting. My favourite of the story puzzles reminded me of the Da Vinci Code, or the library scene from The Last Crusade. It involved reading the environment for clues, in Latin no less. Indy's camera and journal also play a part, and I only wish there were more puzzles of this nature. Besides the tutorial, the Great Circle consists of 4 linear levels and 3 open sandbox levels. The 3 open areas are pleasantly distinctive. The Vatican is a maze of marble corridors, in which you constantly feel the urge to check your back. Giza has colossal tombs, sphinxes and pyramids, and on the outskirts a colourful market village. The village has big woven baskets, sun-bleached walls and a mischievous pet monkey, much like the Cairo marketplace in Raiders. The jungle rivers of Siam are immersive for their sounds as well as their sights. You'll hear frogs ribbiting and crickets cricketing and all around the gentle rippling of water. The design team referred to early photos and drawings of Sukhothai to recreate the temple exteriors. The interiors are where imaginations ran wild, but even here you will see features from real-world locations. For instance, the stone columns in the gigantic cavern mirror those in Fingal's cave. You always see this mixture of the real with the fantastical.
Keep your head above water, pal.
The settings are impressive by virtue of their scale, but it's the lighting that lends them depth and drama, as well as a certain tactile edge. Spotlights in a sunken temple shine on overgrown branches and moss-coated stone. In a deserted hideout, the torches shed a glow on the things left behind. In the heavily guarded castell, the lamplit puddles warn you to stray from the main path. In contrast, the sunlit exhibits of the college compel you to take a closer look. In any case, the lighting calls attention to some specific aspect of the scene.
A shrine to sheep. How did they build this?
Each location is furnished with details authentic to the local culture and historical setting. This extends to the written and spoken word. Indy winds up in Siam rather than Thailand. Similarly, the city of Giza is spelt the old-fashioned way. The dialogue is peppered with obscure historical terms that might have you reaching for a dictionary. When Indy refers to the towers of a temple as prangs, he is using the word specific to Khmer architecture.
3 prangs represent the Hindu trinity.
Indy is a master of languages. There are scenes where Indy translates foreign speech for the benefit of his companion. Also, the village storytellers tell their stories in the local language, with the subtitles revealing the translation. This makes sense from a character level, as you're not just seeing but hearing things from Indy's point of view. His translational abilities are emphasized for good reason. They end up playing a significant role in the plot.
I think I'm starting to get the hang of this.
There's a funny scene where a village leader asks Indy to place his hand inside a jar of terror, seemingly as part of an initiation ritual. You can sense the writer poking fun at Hollywood tropes here, as well as viewer expectations and the Temple of Doom, with its backward portrayal of ethnic cultures. Indy is far less of a savior figure in this story, and this seems like a deliberate choice on the writer's part. There are many scenes where other people come to his rescue.
Thanks for the help.
The adventure missions are where the most fun is to be had. These contain explosive set pieces, cinematic puzzles, and perilous temple escapes. There is a strong element of exploration during the treasure hunting sections, which affords a slower pace to proceedings. You'll come across the occasional curveball, a stone bridge collapsing, or a tree branch break-in, but the emphasis is often on adventure over action.
You're from a long time ago.
The fieldwork missions are side quests with links to the main narrative. These serve as side dishes to the main course, although they can be surprisingly substantial at times. One standout mission has Indy trapped in a cave with a former student of his. The pair must survive a series of deadly traps in order to escape. However, just as dangerous as the traps are the woman's embittered feelings towards her ex-professor. There are smaller side quests called mysteries that have you exploring strange happenings in the local area. These could be following the trail of a disguised thief or a thieving monkey. The content here is far fluffier, sometimes raising a smile or a hair on one's back, but mostly acting as filler. Some of the most frivolous missions not marked in your journal have you performing good deeds for the local people. Examples include retrieving a book for a nun, handing a photo of the Sistine Chapel to a priest, or returning a lost letter to a postman. These serve as pleasant distractions, although they're entirely irrelevant to the plot.
متشكر قوي يا خواجة يا أمير.
Almost every collectible or discovery in the game can be located on the map after obtaining the relevant guidebook. The exceptions are 3 ancient keys needed to unlock a chest late in the game. This means there is little need for external help, but having said that, some ancient relics remain tricky to find, even after being marked on the map. The maps are pleasantly tactile but take a while to wrap your head around. Because most relics are found underground, you have to flick through your previously collected maps to pinpoint their locations. Otherwise, you're just shown their rough locations on the city map. Once you understand this, you start to feel more like a treasure hunter and less like a headless chicken.
Another one of these artifacts.
Documents link the settings with historical figures. A secret room in the castell contains a letter from Cesare Borgia. In the Zeppelin, you'll come across a top-secret document from Hitler. In Giza, you'll find a well-preserved letter about Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. Reading these makes you feel like you're pulling the curtains back on history. Other documents foreshadow future plot events or side missions, cluing attentive readers to what's up ahead, and adding further context. The adventure books will make you stronger rather than smarter, with some books proving far more useful than others. less useful but more graphically appealing are the comics, with their lurid covers featuring monstrous creatures and demonic entities, hinting at boss battles to come.
I know karate!
Less colourful and far less appealing are the enemies. The Nazis are depicted as stupid, or at least highly impressionable and overly superstitious, so it perhaps makes sense that they should act stupidly. Guard reactions are wildly inconsistent. One guard responds with great interest to a frying pan being dropped, while another reacts to a loud explosion as if someone has just passed wind. Even in uniform, dropping down beside a soldier can send the entire camp into a flutter.
The more the merrier.
But then again, you get the odd dozy guard who doesn't even register a punch to the face. More problematic than the underreactive guards are the overreactive captains. The red-banded officials can see straight through your disguises. Walk in front of one for more than a few seconds, and will have the whole camp after you in no time. On the one hand, they ensure that you can't just cruise around an enemy camp. On the other, they make for a constant nuisance. They often patrol past documents, meaning you can't always read a letter on the spot. They also like to walk along well-connected paths, meaning you can't always dash straightforwardly across the map. For some reason, the Vatican has a captain placed right next to a fast-travel signpost, which I found more than a little odd, not to mention extremely annoying.
Guess I better get going.
The Great Circle really doesn't want you to fire a gun unless you have to. It takes a surprising amount of headshots to down a Nazi. This was the first thing I learnt upon acquiring a gun. The second was that Nazi heads are far less impervious to bullets than they are to frying pans. The designers would rather you outsmart than outshoot the enemy, and so gunplay is actively discouraged. Arguably, this keeps the combat true to the character. However, the rules feel too restrictive, the guns too ineffective. In The Last Crusade, Indy takes out 3 Nazis with a single bullet. In the Great Circle, you'll be lucky to take down 1. With gunplay largely out of the question, you're encouraged to use stealth first and if all goes to pot, melee combat second. Because the enemies are not the smartest, they usually follow simple patrol routes or stay rooted to their allocated position. If they see a body, they'll call an alarm, so it's advisable to drag bodies out of sight. As a result, stealth sections boil down to picking off isolated enemies or taking the path of least resistance, which could be a side passage or an elevated route. You can crack your whip as a distraction to draw a guard away from his pals, and if you're spotted, then you can flutter about picking up bats and hammers with which to bludgeon the enemy, like a slapstick version of Donny Donowitz. There's really not much more to it than that. Except the rules of engagement sometimes feel fudgy. For example, you have little trouble taking down your run-of-the-mill guard, but if you come across one of the beefy-looking fellas, then you might be in for a shock. All it takes is 1 or 2 swipes of his club to knock you down. On top of that, his head is tough to crack. Ambushing him from behind may not produce the desired result. In fact, it may have you crawling around for your hat, and that's if you're lucky. With combat, you can't always rely on your instincts, nor common sense. It's the same for fighting giants. The first big fight has you dance toe-to-toe with Locus, the cat-thieving giant. You go in expecting to find him massively overpowered. After all, he was shown to be freakishly strong during your initial encounter at the college, the end result being Indy choked out on the floor and Locus barely touched, let alone bruised. However, it turns out that you just need to keep hitting him and dodging his attacks until he eventually topples to the floor. It's far too straightforward, and beyond that it doesn't make much narrative sense, given what we've seen him capable of. Another boss fight starts off promising but ends up feeling repetitive and uninspired. It takes place in a dark and spacious arena that can be lit up only in certain places. The boss prowls around the arena, growling and groaning, and speeding up when he can sense you close at hand. So far, so creepy. You learn to avoid the enemy. You learn to attack him when he's off guard. You attack him a great number of times, but he doesn't seem weakened. So you start to wonder if you're missing something. Eventually it turns out that you aren't missing anything. He unceremoniously topples over, and what started off strong ends up falling flat. The Great Circle has a habit of repeating itself. As you collect more and more guidebooks, you'll find the map littered with lots of little icons. There is some good side content here, but then there are also many unexciting fetch quests that exist for the sole purpose of padding out the game.
Still got it.
If the fieldwork missions are the wheat, then the discoveries are the chaff. But then there is good chaff and there is bad chaff. Worst of the lot are the radio frequency cards. Handing them to Gina will reveal the locations of boxes of cash, which are entirely worthless if you have nothing left to buy. Medicine bottles are scattered across the enemy camps. Bring enough of them to the town doctor and you can claim an adventure book or two. They can be collected with little to no friction, as long as you're wearing the right disguise. You'll need to collect every single relic if you want to unlock the secret ending. Many of them are deviously hidden, but they all look boringly the same. The lost artifacts at least offer some visual variety. Each one is a unique museum's piece that can be studied from various angles. The best content in any case is that which has the strongest human touch.
We'll figure out where this should be.
The Great Circle does not match the breakneck pace of the films, but then again it never could. It takes about 15 hours to complete the story, and an extra 25 to get through all the side content. And when much of the gameplay involves travelling from A to B or looking for small gear pieces or fiddling with combination locks, then the pace is bound to stutter. The tutorial level tells you all you need to know about the pacing of this game. If an Indy film is a rollercoaster ride, then The Great Circle is a lazy river ride, with some occasional rapids thrown into the mix. The game takes a maximalist approach, or at least I don't remember the parts of the films where Indy pauses infiltrations to take photos of cats on terracotta roofs.
More of a dog guy.
In Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy steals a soldier's outfit in a matter of seconds. He knees a Nazi in the head whose hat goes flying straight up into his hands. When we next see Jones, he's wearing the full disguise. The game, on the other hand, doesn't let you steal the shirt off a black shirt's back. Instead, you must look for a specific pile of clothes at a specific location at a specific stage of the game. It's a fun little treasure hunt, but it doesn't really suit our hero's pragmatic nature. Due to this constant to-ing and fro-ing, the action scenes are marked by a jarring change of pace. It feels strange to go from spending hours looking for the same old stone pieces to rushing headlong into an intense blockbuster sequence, with planes exploding or boats exploding or a massive ship getting ripped to pieces, before presumably exploding. I was half asleep when I witnessed these sweeping scenes of destruction. Each one must have cost a small bomb to make, and each one is over in a flash, but there's no way to individually replay them, which just feels wasteful. Another issue with this slow-burning brand of adventure is that you can easily lose track of the dot-joining plot. When Indy comes across each new discovery, you find it hard to share in his feelings of childlike wonder, because he reacted with similar amazement to the last great thing discovered, and so on. As a result, these scenes start to feel old, just slow rather than fast.
Power of the stone.
The final act is not without its charms. It presents a striking series of shots, as this huge monster of a thing is dragged out of its subterranean lair, but the German trains push towards the camera, chucking up thick black smoke. The grand sense of spectacle and uber-detailed craftsmanship is mightily impressive. However, the excitement fizzles out in spite of an epic biblical backdrop and much wild and frantic screeching by the villain. Before things turn manic, there are long scenes where Voss lays out his evil plan to the hero, in the manner of a Bond villain. His calm and composed demeanor breaks when the inevitable happens, and then suddenly he's screaming, "I'm going to kill you all," as if he hasn't had ample time to do so by then.
Remember, Emmerich Voss. but to M's and to S's.
When Voss goes overboard, the scene verges on parody. It's a very silly fight that takes place against the backdrop of thunder and waves. It somewhat resembles the duel between Neo and Agent Smith, with the hand-to-hand combat and the biblical amounts of rain, except you can't buy Voss in the role of expert fighter.
I know karate!
Meanwhile, the soundtrack, with its frantic flurries and fierce chorus, recalls the final duel in The Phantom Menace. The composer Harb evokes the same religious tempo-like feel of Williams' score. However, you can't immerse yourself in it. Norman Voss cuts in every 2 kicks with his incredibly camp supervillain dialogue.
I'm playing you like a cat playing with a...
The game ends with a bittersweet scene that takes cues from Casablanca. While well acted, it feels too abrupt for an adventure of this scope. The final scene doesn't tell the hero back to Marshall College. Rather than go full circle, it leaves him in the lurch. On a technical level, The Great Circle has some glaring bugs, or at least that was my experience of it playing the game on Xbox Series S. These range from the innocuous man gliding across the desert and soldiers stuck in a weird jumping loop, to a broken side mission that forever stalled my progress. I get the impression that the vast bulk of playtesting took place before the Giza level, or it could just be that the high walls of the Vatican do a better job of masking the glitched guards. In any case, I didn't experience any issues until the Zeppelin touched down in Egypt. In Siam, I found myself stuck in scenery, and the serpent chest glitched, requiring only 2 keys to open as opposed to 3. I also noticed considerable pop-up when travelling on the rivers. The most problematic bug for me was not being able to talk with a delivery boy in Giza. This makes it impossible for me to collect the last relic. From a technical standpoint, I found The Great Circle to be a better game in the early stages. From a gameplay standpoint, I found that the novelty began to wear off from Egypt onwards, especially when it came to the lockbox puzzles and plethora of collectible items. The game feels bogged down with frivolous content and could have benefited from being more streamlined and asking for far fewer photos of cats, as much as I like cats. Still, there's much brilliance on display here. The presentation is top-notch, whether it's the punchy audiovisual design, the sharply realized characters, or the super-polished cinematics. The story has been handled with care and precision, as has the character of Indy himself, from the scar on his chin to the crack of his whip. It's also nice to play a AAA adventure game that so highly prioritizes the single-player experience. You can complete this one, for the most part, without the use of an online guide. There's plenty of in-game material to point you in the right direction. From that perspective alone, I rate this game 4 hats out of 5 plus a plate full of cornetti.
Smile. Keeping the Vatican safe from rats.